This episode contains material including issues relating to suicide, suicide ideation, and mental health that could be distressing for some listeners. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, please text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or dial 911 in case of an emergency.
This is Carrie Offstein-Rosenthal, and this is the podcast Held.
My love, you left me in the summertime, and all the leaves were on their trees, and all the flowers still smell so.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, as promised, we're going to meet Zach's birth mother. Her name is Angie. In the last episode, in my introduction, I mentioned that this story related to my family. And that relation is that Angie, Zach's biological mother, is my sister-in-law. She is married to my older brother, Randy. And I think it's worth mentioning that I am very close to Angie. I don't pretend to be unbiased. I care about her. I support her. And I think she's fucking amazing. So, keep that in mind as you listen. And with that said, Angie, welcome to the podcast. To start off, I was hoping you could just sort of talk about what it was like growing up in St. Louis circa 1980.
I had a tough time in the earlier years. Just, again, not fitting in, not looking the part, not acting the part. And I did get bullied and, was called names, words flying around such as slut and whore. And I because I was wearing Gloria Vanderbilt pants or whatever I was wearing that didn't fit in. Now, when I went home and asked my mom what they meant, she said, well, it means that you sleep around, you get around with boys. And I thought, my God, that's not who I am. That's never how I want to be portrayed.
What were your expectations of yourself?
I'm not sure what my expectations were for myself. I know how I presented myself in public was extremely important. I knew that I didn't want to ever disappoint anyone.
And what did that mean?
I never wanted to let anyone down. I always wanted to do the right thing.
But you clearly felt comfortable
being rebellious at a certain point.
Yeah.
And that's where that streak came in. I think I was fighting between these two personalities, really. I was curious and I had urges to be bad. And by bad, I mean, trying a cigarette for my first time at summer camp, getting busted at a fair in Creve Coeur.
So now we are in high school. How old were you when you met Mike?
I had to have been maybe 15. I was a sophomore and he was a senior.
15, 16, and he was a senior, 17, 18. What do you remember about him, how you met him?
Well, I do remember a certain groups of friends that used to mull around together. And a friend of his came to me and said, hey, I have a friend who's interested in you. Are you interested in him? It was Mike. And, I said, fine. He can take me out. And he did. And he just made me laugh. He was my second real boyfriend. We were off and on for a couple of years. We were off and on. Again, we were teenagers, we were kids, and it was just one of those get together, break up kinds of relationships. For me, I was still in high school. So on my end, I was completely monogamous, but I also knew he was in college and, I don't know how realistic that would have really been.
Were you saying you loved each other?
Oh, for sure.
How did you feel when you were around him?
Lots of fun with lots of friends around, and our friends commingled, and it was just a fun time.
Did you feel pressure from him to do things either with drugs or beer or?
Yes. But let me say, he wasn't the only one that I felt pressure from. There were plenty of good friends and, that also put on the pressure. But having that, bad girl streak in me and rebellious side, I was happy for him to just bring it on and, push me a little bit. And okay, I was certainly one of those people who wanted to please and not disappoint you. I was also one of those people who was like, if I don't want to do it, I am not doing it.
So you had real love for him and there was a real relationship there.
As real as it could have been at that age.
Tell me just a little bit about like what a date night, a weekend night with your friends and Mike would have been like.
Those days were just the best, being with our groups of friends. And, there wasn't much to do growing up except for get in your car and drive around to, the various houses that you heard might be having parties, going to friends' houses and playing quarters and listening to music and drinking out of kegs. God only knows how we got all of this. But yeah, every once in a while there would be, an actual going out to dinner kind of thing. But mostly it was just our groups of friends getting together and drinking or doing drugs or mostly weed.
And did you ever have an issue with any of those drugs or alcohol?
Never an issue.
So you did it recreationally. It never got in the way of your life?
Never.
Here's my question to you. How did you realize you were pregnant?
I knew immediately. I knew when the protection failed. I just knew. I actually did not take a test. I knew because I missed my period and I was very regular. And as I said, I knew the moment it happened.
Did Michael know?
He did not. He knew that the protection failed, but he didn't have the level of concern that I did. And perhaps because I didn't voice it to him, and, he didn't probably know enough at that age to really ask. And so I remember leaving there feeling like something has just happened.
And how old were you?
I was 16.
And do you remember about when in the year this was?
It would have been the second semester, 1986, the beginning of the year.
So you were 16. Do you remember when your suspicions were confirmed?
When I missed my first period, I knew for sure, I knew at that point, but a part of me kept saying, this just can't be. I'll get my next one. And then that didn't happen. And slowly but surely, things started moving along and there was no question.
Did you had been monogamous with Michael, so you knew it was Michael.
Oh, yes. There was no question.
When you finally realized, okay, I'm pregnant, like what, did you see your belly get bigger? Like, how did you know? Like, at what point was there acceptance of the fact?
I guess when I really started showing, I don't honestly really remember ever fully wrapping my brain around it. I just remember at night thinking, if this is so, how am I going to handle it?
And what did you think when you thought that?
I knew I had options. I knew I had a lot of options. I knew I could and should tell someone. I knew I could get an abortion. I knew if I didn't want an abortion, I could have the baby. I knew that there were people who loved me and people who cared about me out there. But I was very scared and very scared.
What were you scared of most?
How this would impact other people.
You thought about Michael and
I thought, oh my God, how can I do this to him? Obviously he was the first person I thought about telling. And then, I certainly thought about telling my parents, but I could never do that. I didn't want them to think that I was not their good girl. Not to mention, I did not want to crush them.
How were you feeling about you?
Not good. I just wanted to run. I wanted out of the situation. I wanted to wake up and be a different person. I wanted to not wake up. I just wanted this to go away. I just wanted this to go away and have no one know. Okay. That's all I wanted. Yeah.
And you never took a test?
Not that I recall.
What was it like going to school, having this information in your body?
For me, it was very much about appearances and how you portray yourself. And I just went to school and did my thing and portrayed myself as I normally would. Tried to just stay in the moment and focus on my friends and, my real regular teenage life. And at night I would get into bed and cry and just stay awake for hours thinking about my options and thinking about what my plan would be. And I do recall saying, okay, look, you got some time here. You don't have to make any decisions until you start showing. And so I waited to make any real decisions until I felt like I was at a point that I couldn't hide it anymore.
Well, let's go back a little further. Did you keep drinking with your friends? Talk to me about your experience with your friends. Were you still smoking once in a while? Were you still?
Probably all of that is my guess in the early days. Because again, I was two people. Mm-hmm. At night coming home and carrying the secret and just wondering, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this? And how am I going to get through this? And yet I would wake up in the morning and, put on my Reeboks and go to school and do what I needed to do.
Did you have morning sickness?
I recall having some periods of not feeling well. But again, I pushed through it. I had class.
Had there ever been pregnant girls at Ladue that you had seen or observed prior to this? And how did that impact how you wanted to behave?
There were quite a few girls, and they were known as the sluts. How could you be walking around young and pregnant? And they were just shunned practically from society. And, those are the girls who you reference. Oh, I'm not going to be a so-and-so. Mm-hmm. And you knew exactly the kind of person they were talking about.
Had any of your friends, to your knowledge, been pregnant?
Not to my knowledge. But I also just knew in my head that I was not the only one that this has happened to in my school, and certainly not the only one that it happened to in my class. I did know that intellectually, but the difference was it was happening to me. And it was what people are going to think about me.
Did your friends and you discuss the fact that you were sexually active?
Sure.
You were not judging yourself for being sexually active, for example. You weren't even
not at all
for being pregnant. You were judging yourself because it happened to you.
Correct.
Is it fair to say that in hindsight, women from high school who had abortions? Yes.
I do know that there were a lot of women in our high school that had abortions. Yes. I felt desperate. I felt out, like I just wanted to be out of my body. I wasn't blaming myself for getting pregnant. It does take two, but yet it did happen to me. And so why shouldn't I just take care of this myself?
Okay. And so you decided you wanted to take care of it yourself?
I did. I made the decision to not tell anyone and take on this burden by myself. And, what that would look like, I wasn't sure. I did come to certain decisions. I do remember just thinking to myself, okay, here's the decision. You're going to deal alone. You're going to deal alone. You're not going to include anyone else in this. No friends. I'm not telling my friends. I am not telling my boyfriend. I am not telling my parents. I am not telling any of my friends' parents. I am going to hold this. I got myself into this. I'm going to get myself out of this. And no one needs to feel the pain and the fear and the disappointment that I feel right now.
What were your times alone like?
Horribly sad. I look back, I was so insecure and terrified, and I felt so alone and so disconnected to anyone and everyone in my life. And had I shared this with anyone, certainly that experience would have been different, but I didn't, and it wasn't. And it was brutal. And it took a really, really, really big toll on a very young girl. And it shaped me for who I am today. Being very guarded and shut off and disconnected in a way so that I didn't have to feel pain, essentially, and fear.
And when you say you didn't have to feel pain, how did you avoid that?
I was definitely able to build those walls. What happened to me is not any different than what has happened to so many other people. The difference is I kept my issue a secret, and it festered, and it didn't take much time for that to happen. It shaped everything. During the day, I had to shut those feelings down. I had to quiet that sadness and fear and that desperation. And I had to walk into the student lounge in my cute little outfit and my books and go about my teenage life I could not allow myself to think about what was going on inside of me. Those feelings would be saved. Those feelings and those thoughts would be saved for nighttime. That's when I allowed myself to really think about what was going on. But it was very easy for me to say, and when I say easy, I believe that I molded myself into this person who thought, I'm just not going to think about it. I'm just not thinking about it. I'm going to shift my focus onto something else, which is what I did during the day. And then at night, again, when I'm by myself with my thoughts and my head is swelling and my body is changing and I'm trying to, meander my way through a pregnancy, and I didn't know what was happening to my body. And, that was scary and interesting.
Did you feel like you needed to go to a doctor?
Yes. But, I'd also made decisions in my head that prevented me from making those phone calls to a doctor. But calling a doctor would also entail at some point having to tell a trusted adult. And I didn't want to do that. So yes, for the baby's sake, did I need to go to a doctor? 100%. But let me tell you, at a certain point during that pregnancy, it was more about just myself surviving.
So you said you had plans that prevented you from seeing a doctor. What were those plans?
Of all the sleepless nights, the bazillions of options that I remember mulling through, in my young brain, I decided that suicide would be the best way. I chose to off myself as opposed to telling the truth about myself. I thought, I'm going to wait a little bit longer. I'm going to get my ducks in a row.
What did that mean?
Just wrapping my head around what was going to happen and how I was going to do it. And I decided that I would go buy some sleeping pills, which I did. And I had them. And I held them in my hand for a long time. And I remember putting them in my nightstand and hiding them in a back drawer and hoping my parents wouldn't find them. Also hoping I'd remember where I'd hidden them for when it was time to take them. And one night I just decided it's time. Without giving a single thought to the people that I would be leaving behind or to the people who would find me and whose lives I would ruin forever, I took pills. I took a lot of pills, but I didn't take enough because I woke up the next morning and I was sick. But I woke up and I think I got sick and put on my clothes and went to school and went on about my day. And that night, I remember thinking, okay, now we're a little bit back to square one. You have to decide what you're going to do. You can either do it again and do it right and just do it right. Or you can make another plan. And it took me some time to come up with another plan. But I remember at some certain point driving myself to school and thinking, it's time. You're too far along. Something has to happen. And I can't do this by myself anymore. And I went home not going to school. Actually, I remember driving to school and turning a different way and sitting in a park for a while and sitting on a bench and crying and going over in my head the exact words that I would use to tell my poor mother. And I came home from the park after crying for I don't know how long and practicing exactly what I was going to say to my mother. I don't actually remember my exact words to her, but I remember a lot of crying and a lot of hugging and feeling a lot of love and feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, some way, this was going to work out. My mother told my father, and they were very supportive and asked what did I want to do? Did I want to keep this baby? We went to the doctor, and I believe I was already over 7 months pregnant at that time. And there were really no other options. I had to either keep the baby or give the baby up for adoption. And there was just no chance in the world that a teenager, me, that I could raise a child. And so my decision was to have that baby without anybody knowing and putting it up for adoption. And then moving on with my life. My parents begged me. They begged me to get therapy. They begged me to tell my boyfriend. I did neither of those things.
Why?
And
why didn't you?
I didn't want to ruin anybody else's life. I didn't want to disappoint anybody. I had a way that I wanted to portray myself, and that was not how I wanted to portray myself.
And did you feel like everybody else's life was more important than your own?
I'm not sure that I felt that. I just felt like I didn't want to be responsible for somebody's sadness or, I didn't want them to have to carry any kind of a weight. Certainly not what I was carrying.
In your way of thinking of your life, do you feel like when you're close with people that you shouldn't burden them in any way ever? Is that part of your philosophy?
Yeah, yes, that's part of who I became. That whole situation molded me. It made me who I was. It was the secret and the shame.
Mm-hmm. How did you keep people from knowing physically?
I was tall and thin, and the 80s was full of crazy fashions, and I was able to wear big baggy shirts and big baggy pants and get away with it.
And did anybody ask you if you were pregnant?
Not directly. I do remember hearing things. My mother asked me if I was, and the reason why she did is that she hadn't bought me any feminine products for some time. And so, she was on to me in a way, and I refused to go to the doctor and I refused to come clean.
Did your mom know you were having sex?
She had inklings for sure. I mean, she knew that I was with this guy, and I think she had to have assumed. But it was never directly asked of me, and I certainly would not have come forth with that information just on my own.
So it wasn't like you had a fear of telling them because they didn't like Mike?
Absolutely not. No.
And so when she asked about it, what did you say?
Leave me alone. You're ridiculous.
Did any of your friends ask you about it? Did your sister ask you about it?
Yeah, my sister grew up in the room right next to me. I certainly did not want her to know. She was my little sister. I was supposed to be the example. I wasn't supposed to be the one that this happened to. I wanted to be perfect in her eyes. And so she would have been on the list of the last people I would have wanted to have known.
I just am imagining you're showering, you're coming out of the shower. Did you have was the bathroom, did you have your own bathroom?
No, we shared a bathroom, but there were different entrances into it and out of it. And, we were not the kind of family that walked around unclothed.
No one in your family knew when you would go to friends' houses and have sleepovers, which I'm assuming you still had. What was that like?
For me, it was difficult. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be worried about the things that they were worried about and have the things going on in my life that were going on in their lives. But I was carrying a deep, dark secret, and going over their house and being with them and having plans. It also made me realize where I was in life. I was going through very different things and having very different worries than they were. So while I did allow myself to enjoy and have fun, it was also partly I've got to keep this secret, meaning I have to physically look like myself and not look like I'm pregnant. Worrying about that, it was a little bit of an acting game. It had to be. I didn't want anyone to know. What
was your relationship like with Mike? Did you still see him? And if you were still having sex?
Yes, at some certain point we were, but I'm thinking we were more off again than on again during that time period from what I can recall. The nature of our young teenage relationship was you get together, things are all good, you get in an argument, you break up for a few days, you get back together. Mm-hmm. Again, it never occurred to me that he and I would raise this baby together. I mean, I had a life to live and I wanted to put this chapter behind me, and he was already living a life in college and he had a bright future in front of him. And
what were your summer months like? At that point, were you still drinking? Were you still smoking? Did you stop?
That probably had lessened at that point. I wasn't doing my normal summer things, going to the pool and laying out on a raft and live my life during the day and hope and pray that the next couple months would come and go so fast.
Looking at yourself in the mirror.
I did not.
You did not, ever.
I did not ever, not a single solitary time, look at myself in a mirror pregnant. I never did. I don't know that I could have ever forgotten that. Same as when the baby started to move and I started to feel it. And all I wanted to do was just connect and play with that little foot or elbow or whatever it was that was poking at me from the inside out. But I knew that I could not get attached to this baby in any way, shape, or form, because there would have been no way I could have had feelings for something that grew inside of me and let it go. And, as we discussed, I'm that kind of person. It's black or white. And I'm either going to love this child implicitly 100%, or I'm not going to love this child at all. I allowed myself a few minutes at night to connect with what was happening inside of me. At the same time, just wanting to fast forward and just live a regular teenage life.
Was there ever a time where you thought again about suicide?
During the pregnancy?
Mm-hmm. After you had told your parents, for example?
No.
Did any of your friends ask you about it? Because your behavior changed or because you looked bigger? Nothing?
Never.
And there's one picture you showed me, and I think you said it was taken. It's the only picture you know of where you were pregnant. And maybe we'll try to figure out a way to show it. You were just in big sweaters and big pants, and maybe people thought you had gained a little weight or something, but there was no question.
Well, and that was, at some certain point, I felt like I was really showing. And I remember talking to the doctor and saying, look, what can we say? If somebody asks, he said, it's sort of out there, but you can always say that you had a large cyst. And if anyone asks why you've been out of school, you say you had surgery to have it removed.
And that was, you were out of school only when you were pregnant?
Oh, for a very short time.
Did you ever consider having an abortion?
Yeah, I certainly did. But, again, I was 16, 17 years old and I didn't have any money to do that. I didn't have the resources. Sure, my mom worked for Planned Parenthood. I guess I could go down there, but again, I was a teenager. That's not something I could have done all by myself. That would have entailed telling someone. And that I would have rather died than had someone else know.
Do you have any stories about being with your friends and feeling like you had to cover it up and feeling afraid that someone knew or would know?
I mean, that was the constant fear every day. What am I going to wear? How am I going to make it so nobody catches even a slight glimpse? That was a constant concern every waking moment.
And what did that do to you? What toll did that take on you?
It was tough. It was tough. I mean, the trying to cover it up part, physically covering it up wasn't as difficult as trying to cover up the emotions.
Just to go back to the suicide, why did you feel like ending your life was the solution?
I really did, to the best of my recollection, go through every scenario of what I could possibly do. And it was such an overwhelming feeling that I didn't want anyone else to know. And the only way for that to happen is, number one, I can pick up my life, get on the next Greyhound bus, and start over as somebody else. Was that really an option for me? No. It is certainly something I recall thinking about. But the better option would be is if I just did not have to deal with the pain anymore.
Did you think about the loss it would be to your family and friends?
No, I didn't. And I that is a part of this story that I will go to my grave regretting. I had the resources. I had people who loved me. I had people who I trusted. And I chose to not talk to them about what I was going through. That led me down a path that in my young brain made me think my only option here, I could face the shame and give up the secret, or I could, to my knowledge, take that with me to my death. Now, would they have found out I was pregnant after the fact? Maybe. But you know what, at that point, I was thinking, look, I'm dead and gone, and who cares? It's not for me. I wouldn't think about it anymore. It's all good. But in my young brain, it did not occur to me what that was going to mean. So, it's interesting because the largest part of me was so concerned what everybody's thinking and how this is going to impact everyone. Yet I was so willing to take my own life, and it didn't occur to me how that would affect her. I guess I would have, in the end, just rather been dead and not see their pain than to have really had them know what was going on with me.
When you said I had so much shame and so much fear of people finding out, I would have rather died than people find out. Earlier, when you were talking about all of this, you said, I need to apologize because I had money, I had resources, I had people who loved me. And I will go to my grave regretting that is what I wanted to do. And I find that interesting that rather than having compassion for your teenage self, you feel the need to apologize. Because I would say that you didn't do that consciously. You weren't like, I'm going to hurt some people right now. You were instead saying, I am desperate and this is how I'm handling my desperation.
Yes, but I also had options.
But did you feel like you had options? Because if you felt like you had them, you would have taken them.
I felt like the best option for me was to take my life. I knew that there were many other ways I could travel down this road. And I did try to play these scenes out in my head. What would it look like? How would it be if you, right this second, what would this look like if you actually told your mom and dad? What would it look like if you told your friend's mother, talked to someone at school? If I tell so-and-so, that person is going to feel like I feel, which is shitty, and they're going to be scared for me, and they're going to be sad, and I don't want that. And then aside from that, they're going to think of me in a certain light that I don't want them to think of. And you know what? When I look back on that teenage girl, and my heart breaks. I feel horrible for her. The pain was beyond what I could measure in terms, but I really sorry for that young girl. But I feel like I made fucking choices, really stupid choices, and decisions that I will forever regret. Namely, not telling Michael, not telling my parents, not telling someone immediately will be one of my biggest regrets. My largest regret will be attempting to take my own life. And I will never forgive myself for either of those things. And I'm working towards it. But I think that I will forever carry these emotions of being very sad for that young girl, but also feeling like, I made my bed.
If I were telling you my story about having a child, being pregnant, keeping a secret, trying to commit suicide, not telling the father, not telling my family, if I were to tell you that, what would you say to me? The same thing that I keep trying to tell myself now, but it's hard for me to believe or recognize or process. I was a kid. I was just a kid trying to do the best I could do. But in my mind at that time, and still in my memory now, I was not a kid. That I immediately became a mature adult in my brain. Or that was my perception of myself, I should say. That, look, I'm handling big girl shit. I am now a big girl. And I think I eventually talked myself into knowing that. Yeah. But you weren't.
I was still just 16 or 17.
That's right. I was still just 16 or 17. And there's no way a 16 or 17-year-old girl, any 16, I don't care how mature you are, rich you are, well-adjusted, whatever, there is no way a 16 or 17-year-old girl can have you can't have life experience yet. You just don't have it.
I can wrap my brain around what you're saying. And I understand what you're saying. But maybe I'm just still too connected to that 16 or 17-year-old girl. Maybe I'm still too close to those feelings that I haven't fully processed, but I have always felt like that 16 or 17-year-old, while she was a child, she should have known better. At 53 years old, I can see that everything happens just exactly like it should. Everything happens just exactly in the time frame that it should. And I'm processing what happened. It was 35 years ago, but honestly, because I never processed then, it is as difficult for me now as I think it could ever be to try to understand all of this and look back and not feel so connected to my feelings as a teenager. And that's, I'm really working on separating myself. I'm this pendulum. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm swinging more to my teenage brain. I'm swinging more to my 53-year-old adult wise brain. And sometimes I'm just swinging right in the middle, which is a good place to be, able to connect with both sides. But I'm still able to go full throttle the other way and get back into that 16, 17-year-old brain. And I can still be super hard on that kid.
If you had to step back and say what you get out of being hard on that 16-year-old kid, what do you get out of that? What did she get out of that?
Whatever skills or walls I built during that time got me through it. I got through it. It wasn't pretty, but I did get through those 9 months, and I have gotten through these last 35 years. And there's a quote that I found back years ago, and it's just always been in my mind, and it's been in my mind lately more than ever. What you think is your limit is nowhere near your limit. For some reason, it's taking me time and time again to recognize that, but I didn't think that in any way, shape, or form at that young age, I didn't think I would be able to get through it physically, emotionally. I didn't think I could ever get through it, get past it. And yet I did. And that lesson did stick with me for a little while and then been renewed. You can get through anything. And that is what I keep telling myself. And that is a lesson that I learned from that pregnancy. It is a lesson I have learned these days more than ever. I can be pushed and I can be pushed and I can be pushed and I can be strong. And I can also crash and burn for a minute. But in the end, I can do it. I don't have to take my life. I don't have to run. I can work through it.
You can. And, the other thing that I just feel the need to say is that it's important for people to realize that you are on the continuum of generosity and giving in terms of other people's flaws. You are not what I would call a judgmental person. You are not somebody, I think it's important to say because you are so much more generous of spirit to others than you are to yourself, or you were to yourself. I think you're getting more kind to yourself.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely have never hated on anyone in my life the way I have hated on myself. And I am certain that I am not alone, particularly among women who feel that way.
There's a quote, I don't know who it's from, but they said, the less we speak of our flaws to others, the more they roar in our own mind. And I think about that a lot with myself and with you. What does that mean to you to hear that? Is that true?
It's possible, but, I've always been that person that never thought highly of myself in any way, shape, or form. Was I proud when I graduated college with honors? Yes, but...
You mean you never felt like you were allowed to value yourself?
Maybe I felt like it was something that I just didn't deserve from myself or anyone else. I don't know. And I'm not even certain as to where that could have come from.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this question, and I'm sorry to ask it, but I just feel like if I were listening to this, I'd want to know. When you thought about, or when you tried to commit suicide, did you think at all about the embryo? What was inside of you?
Yes, actually. And I was so selfish. And it's amazing how many things I thought through to the detail, but the suicide part, I just remember thinking, it doesn't matter. We're both dead. If I'm dead and the baby's dead, we're both spared. There's, nothing gained, nothing lost necessarily. I mean, obviously my life, but not the baby's life was never known anyway. So yeah, why not just do it all in one fell swoop?
Walk me through the experience of taking the pills. Where were you? How far along were you? Was it hard to take the pills?
So I had them hidden in my nightstand for a while, and I had a day planned out, and maybe that day would come and go, and I just wasn't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, I don't know how to really do this. Do I take the entire bottle? Do I take just more than is necessary? I don't know exactly how many I took. I poured them into my hand, as many maybe as would fit in my hand comfortably.
You remember taking them?
I do. I remember laying there and just waiting to just fall asleep. I do remember the tears rolling down my face. And I remember feeling a sense of freedom, that I wasn't going to have to deal with this shame or this secret anymore. I could just let it all go. And then I woke up the next morning and I was angry with myself.
For what?
For not taking enough, for not being able to do it right. Because now, what do? It was hard enough to have those pills sitting in my nightstand for so long and waiting to take them, but would I choose another option? Would I try to find my dad's gun?
Mm-hmm.
My father was in the Army and had a gun. I didn't know where he kept it. I wouldn't have known how to use it, but it crossed my mind.
The night you had the pills in your hand, were you scared at all?
I must have been. I must have been. I think I also was just so ready to feel some relief from the secret, that in a way there was something comforting about the tears rolling down my face and me just drifting off.
Were you in your bed?
I was. Yeah.
Can you see yourself there still?
Oh yeah. It's very vivid. The next morning, again, one with very mixed emotions. How can I fuck this up? This was not part of the plan.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention, how the hell am I going to go to school with all these drugs in me? And I feel like I can barely function.
Do you remember seeing your family, your sister? Did you?
No.
You were in a daze, it sounds like. Do you remember that day at school?
I don't. No. Mm-mm. I don't know if it was that night or nights later, but I do remember saying, okay, now what? Now what do we do?
If you had to say one thing you were proud of about yourself during that time, what would it be?
It's interesting. I can think of it in two ways. I can think of it as my teenage brain, which is I'm proud of myself for being able to get away with the secret. Even now, hearing the shock and surprise in people's voices that happened during that time, there was just a tinge of me that is like, oh, good. I did it. I was able to hold the secret. Today, as a 53-year-old, when I look back, What am I proud of? I'm proud that I survived. Just that, in whatever shape that turned into, however that molded me, for whatever that experience was, I survived it. I don't know how I did. But I did.
Do you feel any pride in the fact that you afforded those lives to happen?
Things have a different meaning. I see things in a completely different light with totally different lenses. What I put myself through was not for nothing. This child that I put up for adoption made a family's life. It made their world. It started their family. It gave them the love they always desired and dreamt of. And while obviously I still carry a lot of pain surrounding this, I have to say at this point, it's just so worth it. I couldn't have done anything any differently. This family that adopted this baby were so deserved of having a baby and giving their love to this child. And I can't imagine for them what life would have been like without this baby. And so for that, I'm very, very grateful that this happened. I gave someone else a life. I took away part of mine. But it wasn't for nothing. Yeah.
You have been listening to the podcast Held. Tune into the next episode when Angie is joined by her mother and father, who share how they learned that their daughter was pregnant. And Angie openly shares the experience of giving birth and what it was like giving the baby up for adoption. Here's a little preview. And what were your feelings like after you gave birth?
They did say to me, Angie, do you want to hold this baby? There was a thread in me that was desperate to just see that it was healthy and that I hadn't screwed anything up. And if I had held that child, I could have never forgotten the weight of that baby in my arms or the sight of that child. And I don't think that I could have, slept at night seeing that baby. So no, I said, please, I do not want to hold this baby.
Angie, thank you for your vulnerability and for your willingness to share your story. This is Carrie Offstein Rosenthal. You have been listening to the podcast Held. Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll follow us and tell all your friends about us. See you next time.
If you or someone you know is considering suicide, please text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or dial 911 in case of an emergency.